Afternoon, Mike.
Good afternoon, Peter.
We ended our last set of interviews and chats um, talking about the end of your involvement with shared experience. Although, as you pointed out, shared experience carried on as a company until only quite recently.
Yeah,
Um, and you also had said that you had done some work at the National with McKellen and Sheila Hancock, I understand, Edward Petherbridge,
right.
Cherry Orchard. And then Peter Hall
Yeah,
asked you to come back
yeah,
to do a season.
yeah. He asked me to run a company there because at that time, I may have said this, uh, the policy was that there were three directors, each with their own discrete company, doing, I think, three productions during a year, which more or less filled up the three theatres. He was also busy down at Glyndebourne, Peter Hall. He was running two big institutions at the same time. And so that was the situation. So we did talk about the cherry orchard, didn't we?
Yes, yeah.
Well, back of that, Peter Hall invited me to come and set up a company within the National Theatre. So then I had the predicament of, oh, what do I do with shared experience? But I had been feeling for 2 or 3 years, possibly more, that although the company was successful and recognized, and got nice reviews and so forth, that it had become trapped in its own structure. It was very much dominated by what the Arts Council wanted to do or expected you to do within the year. And it was becoming a little bit formulaic. And also, I wasn't quite as exploratory as I was at the very beginning. I was tending to do plays, not necessarily a bad thing at all. And I tried to choose interesting stuff, like the three foreign plays. But it wasn't a bad timing. And I'd been running the company for almost 13 years. And very realistically, very few companies go on and on with the same person for a long time because, your energy changes and other things change. And the audience changes and the culture changes, and you tend to get stuck with what you created at the beginning. You're stuck with what you began with. And that was happening a little bit. So anyway, I debated with myself, should I try to hang on to shared experience while I'm at the National and maybe find a caretaker director, or should I give it up? And I think I did say that I met with cheek by jowl, uh, Declan Donnell and Nick Ormerod, and said, would you have any interest in sort of looking after us as well as cheek by jowl? And they were interested, but it didn't come to anything. And I couldn't think of anybody else who I admired or particularly wanted to offer it to. And so I thought, well, actually, it's probably healthier and more honest for me to say I've done my shared experience. I've, contributed quite a lot. I've found a new way of working, and it's time to move on. And why not go to the National? How very nice. Peter Hall was incredibly generous. It was quite laissez-faire in many ways. And afterwards, some people said to me rather ironically, Peter Hall gave you enough rope to hang yourself, which was true in a way, but we'll get to that. So I resigned from shared experience and started working at the National. And I then thought, oh God, what do I want to do? Because I always have this problem of not knowing what material. As I said, I don't have this wonderful list of things I'm longing to do. And so um, I, I thought, well, what can I do at the National that I can't do anywhere else? And quite cynically, I suppose, I thought, well, spend quite a lot of money. Well, no, they have all the, possibilities of sets and costumes and things, which, I don't really use all that much. But nevertheless, all the facilities were there and the possibilities. And I thought also, possibly with that sort of audience and those theatres, I can do some big productions and it, I won't have to worry about touring and time and people catching their last trains home or so forth, in the provinces. We're in London. So I ended up planning a show for each theatre. And before we decided on the Cherry Orchard with Ian McKellen and Edward Petherbridge, we were casting around what should I do, and I had wanted to adapt a novel then. And an actress who was going to be in the company and eventually wasn't, and whose name I'm ashamed to say I've forgotten, although she was quite a successful actress, said, my father used to love this huge early 19th century French novel by a writer who was incredibly popular, about the 1840s, I think, called Eugene Sue, S-U-E. And he wrote these big, sort of quite left-wing political melodrama pieces. I mean, extraordinary, and they're not quite so admired now, but they're very much part of the, the French canon. Not known here at all, though there were some very creaky translations around. Anyway, I read it. It was huge, thousands of pages. Well, I'm exaggerating, but it was immense. And I read it, and it appealed to all sorts of things. It's a plot by the Jesuits to take over the world. Mm-hmm. And it's about a young Jesuit priest who, by some very devious means that he is not responsible for, is likely to inherit a huge fortune because he's a member of a family whose ancestors have been saving money at 5% for God knows how many years. But there are other claimants as well, coming from all over the world. So there were all these storylines. There was an Indian prince and God knows what else coming from Java, and great. And I thought it was so exciting, and it also had a very strong, left-wing approach as well. But it was also grand guignol and very theatrical and dramatic, and high camp, and so it was a funny mixture. And it needed lots of people and lots of space. And I thought that would be really nice for the Lyttleton. So I suggested that, and people seemed to like. I don't think anybody read it at the National. They sort of said, "Okay, if that's what you want to do," and I started, and it was enormous, and I felt a little bit daunted about adapting it all by myself. Now, this is a very delicate area because I had become friendly with a writer called Micheline Wander, who's still around, and she liked my work very much, and I'd read some of her plays, and we got on very well. And I said, would you be interested in co-adapting this with me because it's huge? And she said yes. So that's what we did. And we found a sort of modus operandi where I would make a big cutting of the material, send it to her, and she would sort of shape it and do it. And it worked quite well. We had to sort of give and take a little bit. But just before I went to the National, I was doing a production of one of my versions of the Arabian Nights in Bergen, in Ibsen's theatre in Norway. And so I'd rehearsed during the day, and then because there was nothing to do in the evening, I went back to this very nice hotel where I was staying. It was so comfortable. It was just I could have lived there forever, and I was there forever, about 3 or 4 months, long rehearsal. So in the evening, I would work on the cuts and send them to her, and blah, 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 you see. So it was very nice, and I was, so I felt very full and happy. Okay. And we eventually got a version going, and it did take about 4 hours, I think, eventually. But that was understood, and there was great debate. Should we do it in 2 days, or should it be done over one night, starting early, and so forth and so on. I think it got down to 3.5 hours, which for me wasn't that long, because there had been, during the 70s and the early 80s, there had been quite a lot of big, elaborate productions that went on for a long time. But of course, things were changing, and I hadn't been noticing the pulse of, of the time. We're shifting a little bit. Anyway, so we did this, and unfortunately our relationship got a bit tricky, and I'll tell you, and then you'll decide whether it's discreet enough or right to refer to it. As we got closer to production and to rehearsals, Micheline said to me, "Oh, well, now you're going to have all the control, aren't you?" And I said, "But come and please be with me in rehearsal." Well, they're only paying me for, 1 day a week or two. And I said, "But look, I want you to be there because we're doing it together." Anyway, so there was already a shift. And I think, and this is, what we're getting now with Me Too, is women who've had the experience of being used by men or felt that the power structure was always against them. It was starting to rise in her, although we had this very nice relationship. And she had a very nice boyfriend now who's a lord. I can't think what he was. They were both Jewish. And I was having dinner with them one night, and this came up, and he laughed and sort of joked with her a little bit about it. And I thought that will purge it. But once it happened, it was there. And sometimes in rehearsal, because an actor had said something, I needed to do something, I would cut something or reshape it. And then she would come into rehearsals, and she got upset about something and just swept out of rehearsals and banged the door when everybody was there. And it was all a bit shocking. I don't want to go into details. Anyway, we weren't talking to each other by the time we opened, and a lot of very unpleasantness. We both had to write a preface because Nick Hearn published it. It is published still, was published. And she wrote a very nice preface. And then after all this, she rewrote the preface, which was nearly so nice. All the compliments vanished. Anyway, but it was very sad. And so we literally weren't talking to each other at all. She'd sit at the back of the stalls. I'd say, "Hi, Micheline." So anyway, and I'm making myself sound very virtuous. I'm sure she was pissed off with me. So, it was tricky. And
Mike, was that the first time that you had that kind of serious run-in with somebody?
Well, I had different run-ins in Israel when I was running the Khan Theatre. It started off with a very nice young woman, and we got on very well, I thought, who was the manager, the administrator. And then after a while, she started to compete with me in a way, and that was tricky. But this was the most personal one, and it was such a change because it had started off so harmoniously. That's happened to me actually 2 or 3 times in my life, where when you think you know somebody and you trust them, and then they suddenly change overnight, and they sort of become, well, Micheline didn't, but this other case, their personality changes totally, and you think, I don't know where I am. And it's very disorientating, quite frightening, quite distressing, but on the whole, no. And up to that, I think the adaptation worked very, very well. It was fine.
Mike, you never told us the title.
The Wandering Jew, Le Juif Errant. And this particular story was over-elaborated by having a sort of running story about the wandering Jew, literally, who can't settle down, who's trying to resolve all his guilt about Christ, running parallel, which gets resolved by this young priest at the end of the story. And I had a very nice company, very talented. I had Paolo Dionisotti and Mark Rylance and Sean Thomas and man you mentioned, Philip Voss, Nick Dunning was in it, yes. It was Sylvester Latouzel. It was very, it was a nice company. It was good, and everybody worked with a will. And the rehearsals were very exciting. And I really, the most important thing artistically was that I had lots of time I had a long rehearsal, a good 3 months, I think. I can't remember exactly, but really exploring melodrama seriously. So the characters were very heightened and very emotional, and there were big dramatic, sort of serial cliffhanger endings all the time. And to make that true, so they lived in this operatic world truthfully. And I felt we did, and it was physically very good, and Paul Dart did a wonderful set. It looked like one of those, Victorian or 19th century railway stations with a lot of steel and wrought iron and things. It was and it was a clever set because the poor actors, I mean, it was before all this digital technology. There were lots of hidden curtains of all different shapes, and you could ruche them or draw them or pull them up in all different sorts of ways. And the actors are running behind the scenes, sort of changing the image just by pulling all these curtains around. So that was very nice, and it was very beautifully lit by Paul. And there was a lot of energy. And the previews went pretty well, I think. And the first night seemed to go very well, lots and lots of applause. The reviews, except for one or two, were awful. Oh, the pantomime season's come early this year, and I really got angry because I thought, can't you see the differences? You know, these actors are playing truthfully and skillfully. And it developed a little cult, but it didn't do very well. The Lyttleton, it wasn't very full. Anyway, Peter Hall was very nice, very kind, and said, on with the next one. I mean, it was very interesting listening to him because he didn't, sit around regretting anything. He always moved forward. And I'm always going, oh my gosh, what did we do wrong? He said, on with the next one. Now, the next show was also a long 4-hour piece. It was a Goldoni play, which I translated. It was a trilogy called La Trilogy da Villeggiatura. And it's about it's a middle class, it's 18th century. Goldoni is wonderful, I mean, extraordinary. Middle class people who live in Livorno, who always go to the seaside, they go on their holidays. Into the country, actually, in the summer. And the first act is about them preparing to go. The second act is with them in the country, and the third act is when they come back home. Now, during that journey, all sorts of things happen to them, and people fall in love and out of love, and people have got money and people haven't got money, and so forth. And it's very witty, and it's got a sort of, it's extraordinary, it's got a sort of Chekhovian undertow. I mean, Goldoni has this reputation of, he did sort of commedia, which is true, but he just used the form of commedia, not in this case, actually, this is very much bourgeois comedy, but the comedy and the wit of his organisation, it covers up this very painful thing about looking at people very seriously. So it was really nice to work on, to give the characters depth. And it looked very nice. It had a totally different feel to the other one. And we opened it, and the week reviews were wonderful, were very, very good. And I thought, thank God. 3.5 hours goes like nothing, and things like that. I thought, good. The Sundays were not very good. And again, we didn't get any audiences. And you have to remember, this is way back in 1987, 88, when the audience was much less adventurous than they are now. People at that time weren't rushing to the National. In fact, it had been doing very badly and got bad reviews. And there was this whole fringe movement. Now all our theatre is very centred, focused on, the big theatres and the Royal Court and the very known institutions in a way. And then it wasn't. And Goldoni had no reputation in this country whatsoever, no interest. And so that didn't do very well. Now, the third show, I had commissioned a new play for the Cottesloe by, this is so embarrassing, a young assistant director who I'd met up at Cambridge. At some point, I was asked to give the Judith E. something lecture for that year, which I did very badly. Judith E. God, I'm sorry, you'll have to do some research, or I will. I can't remember what it was called. And I met him up there, and he was very forthcoming and nice, and we met and we chatted. And he wrote a very short piece called Apart from George, which they did in the studio at the National, and it was really rather wonderful. And I said, why don't you be my assistant and write a play for the third play? So that was the idea. But unfortunately, I'll go and look in a minute and give you the name. I don't know how you edit it in, or I'll repeat something. I suddenly got a message, Peter Hall would like to talk to you. So I went up to his office. He had some meeting room with a lot of the executives there, and they said, look, Mike, we're just getting no audience. We can't afford to keep the company on, so we're going to have to cut the last play and let the company go. And in a strange way, I said, "Oh, all right, okay." I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I don't think you've done any good. I just sort of said, well, you know. And then, of course, I had to tell the company, which was very painful. And there was a lot of, a couple of people got very shirty about it. And I said, well, I apologize. It's my fault. I chose the material. You did wonderful work. I apologize. So that was my story, at the National. Now, within that, while I was there, working there, the atmosphere was very nice and I felt totally supported. And what was wonderful in comparison with working at the RSC, or 15, 16 years later, is that whatever department you went into, costumes, wardrobe, props, you felt you had their total attention, and you were the only show that they were building at that time. And it was very nice, and nothing was too much trouble. And so all that side of it was very, I felt very supportive, and got pretty much everything I asked for. That. Whereas when I went to the other institution, oh, we can't talk to you about that yet. We've got 5 shows ahead of you, and all that sort of stuff went on. So I thought, that's a difference. So I guess I wasn't very shrewd. You see, I'm not clever politically or looking at what do the audience want, what do I want, what's the compromise. I just like the idea of those 2 shows. And they were, I can say the work was good. So 2 or 3 people thought the work was, particularly The Wandering Jew, was sort of revelatory and innovative. Very nice people like Tibblate Wertenbaker thought it was wonderful. And the guy, Pierre Audi, who was running the Almeida at the beginning, said nobody's appreciating the work, it's very, very special and so on. And had an argument with Michael Billington. I was plain about it, apparently. I don't know. But there it is. I was stuck with English attitudes at that time, and, that's the life. So it was very interesting. I had a lot of time. I worked on some big pieces and worked in big spaces, which I could use very nicely. So, there's lots of pros and cons. And I kept a lot of diaries because Nick Hearn said, "Wouldn't you like to write a book about your work then?" And so he sent me little tiny tape recorders. He recorded little cassette things, and I used to come home and type out my own personal diary because I was keeping a diary then, a journal, a daily journal. And so I'd do one for him, do one for myself, 2 for myself, one about life generally, one about the work. So it's hugely, there's an awful lot of material sitting in envelopes. On shelves about that work. There were problems with a couple of 2 or 3 actors who got shocked when they realised the way I worked, which was not fixing things or setting things, although they'd been told that very strongly. So there were a couple of mistakes I made, and I did have to replace one actor, which was not pleasant, but it was done, and the casting department supported me, and there was this particular actor, and I said, look, I will work you hard, it's going to be 6 days a week, and you just have to plan yourself. Within 5 minutes of signing his contract, he was on the phone saying, oh, could I have Saturday off? I want to go to a football match or a cricket match or something. I thought, so I called up the casting people, Gillian Diamond, and said, and then, oh, no, he understands totally, and that was smoothed over, and of course it wasn't. Wrong person for me, not untalented, but anyway, there it is. So I learned lots of things, and I just got a feeling of what it's like to be in the establishment. And although it was very nice, I never felt I quite belonged. And there used to be these awful Friday morning meetings. You didn't have to for all the directors who were working in the company would go into David Hawkins' office, I think, and they'd just chat about the week. And there was something that awful, it doesn't exist anymore, that awful Oxbridge, slightly ironic, put down, cool, detached. And I felt I've got nothing to say, I'm learning nothing, it's not interesting, I hate this. So I suppose I didn't really quite fit in. And I remember one of the directors at the Christmas party, you know, we were talking about Mark Rylance, who was very young then, and I said, oh, he's wonderful. Oh, he never does what he's told. I wouldn't use him. I said, well, he's wonderful, you know. So it was very,
Mm. Mm.
I think the other directors at that time weren't very talented, actually. They were very ordinary. Do you know what I mean? They were successfully conventional people. Anyway, that's all gossip. Under the bridge 4 years ago, so there we are. Anyway, you know, I learned a lot about myself, about how things work, and you see, all these things are quite salutary. I don't think I mentioned this to you, but when I was at Lambda, can I make a little detour? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, when I was at Lambda, there was a wonderful guy called Anthony Bowles who taught music there. And he had a huge success. He'd been MDs for lots of rather good, smart reviews of Maggie Smith in the West End. And he had his own choir, and he could write music, and he could score, and you know, he could get actors to sing, you know, 7-part harmonies and things. And we got on very well. And I said to him, why don't we write a musical? Because they always did a musical for the last year, you know, the third year. So we wrote a music based on Machiavelli's Mandrake. And we did it. Oh, and it was a very starry cast then. Maureen Lipman, Anna Calder Marshall. It was all, you know, they were very namey. Leslie Joseph, they were all in their third year, so all in it. And I wrote it for them, and I added characters to give everybody something to do. And it was great, and it was fun, and everybody loved it. And I have to say, I'm a potentially very good lyricist. And I wrote a good libretto. And it got picked up by a guy called Peter Thomson, who was, I think, from Hungary, was he running the Birmingham Rep, or he was in Birmingham, and he wanted to do it up at Edinburgh in the festival. I think he went to Edinburgh later. And I said, because it actually got reviewed in the Times, you know, then those days, the theatres, you know, the papers used to come and review some of the drama school productions. So it was done up at Edinburgh and got nice reviews. It was okay. It wasn't a great production. It was, you know, but it was all right. And it got picked up by a West End producer called Donald Aubrey, who was hugely successful. He'd done Oliver amongst many other things. And he said he'd like to do it. So Anthony Bowles and I got very excited. And he said, I'm going to give it to Val May to do, who Val May ran the Bristol Old Vic at this time. And again, very conventional director, but had a lot of West End transfers. He directed adaptations of Iris Murdoch and J.B. Priestley and good, you know, and that's solid. So he got it. And he wrote and said, there's a few little changes I'd like to suggest. And I was all very eager, yes, 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 you see. And he suggested them, and I would rewrite stuff and send it to him, you know. And this was before computers, you know, you had to type everything up in duplicate and, you know, God knows what else. You know, it was a real labour of love. And then he sent me the script back, and I started looking through it. And there were lines I'd never written. He'd put things in, and he'd put in things. And I got but I didn't write that, and I had big arguments with him. He said, well, Iris Murdoch doesn't mind. And anyway, but I fought, you know, to keep my own stuff. Well, it was the beginning of, I think it was about 3 years of sort of misery. The show opened in Bristol Old Vic. And it was all right. It was a dreary set, dull production, no style. Apart from Jonathan Lynn playing the lead, it wasn't very good. And then one of the main actors had a car accident and I think broke his leg. And so I thought, thank God it won't transfer now. And I thought, put it down to experience, take a deep breath. No. Donald Aubrey said, I want to bring it in anyway, so I don't want to, and Val May said, I don't want to redirect it. So he got one of the actors in the company to direct it. Because I said to him, Donald, why don't you let me direct it? He said to me, looking me straight in the face, but if you direct it and write it, I'll have no control whatsoever, will I?
Mm.
So the actor, whose name mercifully I've forgotten, who was going to direct, was a nice guy, wasn't a bad actor. He couldn't direct. I don't know why. He promised me everything would be the way it should be. And of course, he was taking orders from Donald Aubrey. Well, I mean, it's like one of those very funny Hollywood movies, about, the biographies of famous composers like Rodgers and Hart and Cole Porter, those terribly fictitious, how they wrote their songs. I would literally be we wrote so many new numbers to go into it. We got very good. We got giggly. I said, "Here's a new lyric," and he phoned me back half an hour later and said, "Here's the music." I mean, I think we wrote about 40, 50 songs. It just went on and on. I mean, and then, oh, we want to put these two characters together because we don't need these two characters. Obviously, it was saving money. And I said, but they're totally different people. No, no, no. If you can't see your way to do this, we can't bring it into the West End. And I should have stuck to my guns, but I sort of hung on, and Ant and I sort of clutched each other and kept saying, well, look, if it gets into the West End and it goes reasonably well, it gives us a little bit of power for the future. Anyway, kind of another very long story, which got more and more painful. It was at the Criterion in the West End, and there were previews. We used to have these meetings every morning to discuss what the show, how we change things. And Donald Aubrey would say, you must do white. And he'd say, okay. So you do white. And then you'd come in the next day and he said, no, I said black. And you thought you were in your madhouse. And all his, sort of slaves were around him who obeyed him. They'd agree with you personally, secretly, but when he was around, they'd agree. I mean, I learnt about hypocrisy, bullying, lies. It was sort of sub-Trumpian in a very minor way, but it was that thing. And whenever there was an argument, well, I found Oliver. I did Oliver. This went on. And he was successful, look, he wasn't a fool. And we just thought, oh, let's just get through the previews. Songs would go in, songs would come out. He'd said, well, I leave the song in for once more. If it doesn't get good reaction, we take it out, fine. It would get good reaction. He'd say, no, it doesn't. And we said, but the audience applauded and cheered. He said, what do all those shop girls know? This was the sort of, I wish I'd had a recorder on. I was very naive and quite innocent. I wasn't very streetwise. I don't think I am now, actually. Do you know what I mean? So, but it was, and it finally opened. And actually, quite by chance, I was looking for something the other day, and all the old reviews dropped out. There were actually two that surprisingly were quite good, but most of them were awful. And I'm slightly misquoting. One said, the less said about this farrago at the Criterion, the better. Full stop. And I stood outside the Criterion and my name was up there, oh, your name's in lights. It wasn't in lights, but in the West End. And I thought, it's a handful of dust. It's like dust in your mouth. It's like ashes. This is not what I want. This is not what theatre's about. It's everything about behaving badly, bullying, playing power politics. I mean, I'd go into rehearsals, and on the opening night, Donald Aubrey, who wasn't a director, sort of said something to the young ingenue in it about, you look like an old woman of 50 or something, and she, thought, what is the point of saying that, I mean, and I have to tell you about the auditions, because this is very, very funny, for the West End. Oh no, when they were doing, no, not for the West End, when they were doing it for Bristol, they did the auditions in Wyndham's, where Oh What a Lovely War had transferred. Now, Oh What a Lovely War is one of my greatest experiences in the theatre. Joan Littlewood. It's the only show I've seen 3 times that wasn't mine. Free, lively, immediate, imaginative, moving, political, wonderful. And we'd go in every night and I'd read her notes for the actors, which was so exhilarating and funny. more bows on your mounds of V, girls, please, and things like that, you know, and wonderful stuff, you know, very. And you two change parts tonight, you know, great. And then I'd go in and sit in the back of the stalls and watch the interviews. So what would happen? Donald Aubrey would sit in the row in front of Velmed and always be turning to him to talk to him. And the actors would come on stage. And it was such a shame. I don't know, I felt ashamed for the act. I felt ashamed for the whole theatre world. Obviously then, or maybe actors still do, they developed a way of coming into audition. So you'd get sort of minor prima donnas, you know, sub-stars who coming on and saying, shaking their head, I'd say, oh, my agent just told me, and I had to rush and get some music, so forgive me if I'm not quite ready. You know, I've been terribly busy, you know, this performance, and just give, you know. And then there were the people that came on and tried to be jokey. Would you like me funny or mysterious? Mm. And I just thought, oh, who are you? Who is there a real person? And every so often a human being would come on and say, hello, my name's so-and-so, what would you like me to do? And he thought, of course, they never got the work. And if somebody quite well known came, Donald and Val were up out of their seats and running, and I've never seen so much bowing and kowtowing and curtsying, and how wonderful to see you, and blah, blah, blah. And then when they'd done whatever they'd done and gone, they'd bitch them. Mm. And they'd talk through, when people were singing, they'd just turn and talk to each other. And I wanted to scream. I didn't have I was a coward. I didn't, well, you know, what was the point? But I'm sounding a bit sanctimonious, but really, I don't think I was exaggerating. I mean, I've written about it without the names in Different Every Night, but it was such an education. And it did nothing to make a creative world, you know, at all. It wasn't, it was... but I think that generation, that breed has died out. You know, the generation where the director didn't get up off their backside for the whole rehearsal and sat there saying, oh, is that what you're going to give us? Well, I guess we'll have to accept that. You know, so you directed by scorn and irony, and you only got up... got out of your chair to go and say, no, move the chair there and pick it up and move it 6 inches. I mean, oh God, you know, another world anyway. So I learnt a little bit about it. So, so in the same way, but not so painfully much, when I left the National, I'd learnt a lot. You know, you learn from your failures and you learn from your mistakes. And you'll learn from not knowing how to deal with certain situations. You know, possibly with that musical, if I'd have been a little more savvy, and Anthony Bowles as well, if we'd known how to handle people. But we were very naive and very idealistic and very protective. We should have been clever about compromising in a way and finding, you know, so, you know, didn't know. Anyway, and so... you know, it gave me time to think. And actually, when I did that musical, it collapsed, I started getting offers of work in Israel. And I thought, well, you know, I had a better time there than here. Go and be Jewish in Israel, see what your Jewishness is like, you know. So that was it. So, I mean, that's the story. So when I left the National, well, it was a strange period because I didn't quite know what the future was going to be because I'd already got this big year planned out. I first of all went to Canada. I went to Banff, which is a wonderful place up in the Rocky Mountains, where they have a big arts sort of school fest, you know, where people, it's so heavy, it was so heavily endowed by Canadian oil and God knows what else. And I did Blood Wedding there. And what was wonderful, because it was...
That's fine. No. I'm just wondering whether we just stop it there, because we are kind of moving into a
You see, once you press the play button, it doesn't stop.
Don't stop anything. But okay, we're gonna we're gonna bring we're gonna bring this one to an end. All right, and then we'll start again in a minute. Okay. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.